And my opening slide is not an advertisement for Georgia Peanuts, but I just wanted to kind of put in a funny opening slide for that. As a university, we cannot promote things, so it was just for informational purposes. And I want to acknowledge my co-author, Dr. Dixit Paudel, who helped me a lot with the data and the compilation for this presentation. So here's what I got for you for an overview. We're going to talk about some of the major producers of peanut. Then we'll dive into the major exporters and importers of peanut. Then we'll dive into the trade policies, what's going on right now in the context of both US and other countries in terms of peanut. And finally, I'll talk about the opportunities for Georgia and the Southeast peanut industry. So let me begin with a tree map for you, looking at three different time slots, 2010, 2018, and 2023. These are the producers, and you can see China is the largest producer of peanut. I'm sure that's not news to you. But in terms of progression, you notice that they've gone from 15 million tons to close to 20 million, more than 20 million tons in about a decade and a half, about 13, 14 years. And India has kind of switched in and out of number 2 position, growing from about 8 million tons to over 10 million tons. And Nigeria, us, USA, and then Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, those are the top players in the context of peanuts. You notice Argentina was a very small red in there. They're not big, but you'll notice when it comes to trade, they play a much bigger role. So one of the major reasons for that production change has been, the underlying key change has been the yield predictor. And you notice the shaded areas in that picture. That's close to the darker shades, particularly the purple and the blue, mean much higher yields. We're talking about 5,000 kilograms per hectare. And you're talking US and China pretty close in terms of the yield. Surprisingly, Iran has the highest yield in the planet. Okay, and I'm guessing it's because of some of the weather conditions associated with Iran. So you probably know more about that than I do. I don't know if you can see this picture clearly. I was worried about the size of the screen. This is called a Sankey diagram. This maps the top 10 exporters and top 10 importers. And you see these bands going from one side to the other side. That's about how much trade is going from one country to the other country. Okay, so among the top countries, you'd see Argentina at the top. As I mentioned to you, production-wise, they're pretty small, but in terms of trade, they're pretty big. And this is for raw peanuts, and the year is 2024. And you'll notice China being a major player. India is not much of a player on the raw peanuts, and we are. We export a lot of raw peanuts. And most of our exports, as you notice, goes to Mexico, Canada, and the rest of the world. China used to be a major market, but not. One thing you want to notice is Senegal and Sudan, the entire exports are going to China. Okay, so if you are wondering who replaced us in the Chinese markets, it's the African countries that have done so. And Argentina exports a lot to Netherlands, and you notice Netherlands is a large importer. It imports from Argentina, it imports from some other countries as well. They're pretty big, and you'll notice in a moment why. There's the processed products trade across countries, the top exporters and importers of processed products. You notice the big players are Netherlands, India. And you saw Netherlands importing a lot of raw peanuts and exporting a lot of processed peanuts. And turns out they are the distribution and processing hub. They are one of the largest producers of peanut oil and also the largest producer of peanut butter. And they in turn ship to Germany, France, and Spain. India's entire peanut oil exports go to China. Almost all of it go to China. Okay. So if you're wondering who replaced the Chinese market, it's the Argentina, Africa, and India, both in terms of raw products and processed products. And we do export some processed products, primarily peanut butter and so on, and that's probably going to Mexico and Canada. This is a map of the globe. talking about tariff quantities, the tariff rates across countries. You first see the raw peanuts one, and you see darker shades means larger tariffs, and then you look at the processed one, peanut oil, and then the peanut butter and so on. There's a higher tariff in Japan and us in the US, pretty high tariffs we do. But after TRQ, which I'll talk about momentarily, but in terms of processed products, we generally have tariffs in the range of 10 to 20% across countries. This slide talks about our policies, trade policies in particular. And you notice we have a tariff rate quota system. We allow up to 43,900 tons of raw peanuts into the US, primarily from Argentina. And the next set of about 9,000 metric tons comes from a variety of countries. That includes some of the Southeast Asian countries. But beyond those TRQs, tariff rate quotas, we've got a nearly 131% tariff on raw peanuts coming into the country. Okay. But we do have some side deals, trade agreements with many other countries that we allow for some free access, but that's not a lot of peanuts coming into the country. On the process side, a similar story. Argentina's got a small quota on the peanut butter, about 3,000 tons, I believe. And Canada's got the largest quota for peanut butter to come into the country, 14,500 tons. Beyond that, we have a hefty tariff on peanut butter. Okay, same goes for peanut oil. We don't have a quota, but the tariff is reasonably large. If you look at our major partners, Canada, they've been phasing out the tariffs over time from 2020 to 2026, and supposed to be out this year, but then back in March or in April after the Liberation Day tariffs, they put in a retaliatory tariff on US peanuts, but that 25% tariff is off as of September 1st. They removed it. Okay. The one other major concern for us on the trade policy side is the European Union. European Union doesn't maintain a tariff, but it maintains a significant non-tariff barrier, which we'll talk about in the next slide. Okay, and as we looked at the landscape of non-tariff barriers for peanut exports and imports, the number one story was aflatoxins. And as you know, there are a variety of aflatoxins, B1, B2, M1, M2, and some in dairy. That's M1 and M2. But we are primarily concerned about B1, and we have a limit of 15 parts per billion as our norm. And for processing, it's about 20 parts per billion. EU is really tough to handle because their B1 limit is 2 micrograms or 2 parts per billion. B1 plus B2 and the other ones, G1 and G2, altogether they only allow 4 parts per billion. And in addition to that, they have a very interesting sampling procedure in terms of how they sample for aflatoxins. Codex Alimentarius, the global rules and regulating authority, has 15 parts per billion as the guideline for most countries to work with on aflatoxins. So jumping to the US context, and that's a map of US where the peanut production happens, and a sharper focus on Georgia, and you see the darker green means at least 40,000 tons for that county, and those are the green shaded points in the map. Looking among the states, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Mississippi. In the top line there that shows you is the Georgia runner peanuts. And everything below is Valencias, Virginias, and other specialty peanuts. And in terms of production, you notice the runner peanuts in Georgia in particular are the only one that's been growing over the past 2-3 decades. I think the data is from 1980, you can see it. The bottom axis is so small. It's difficult to read. And just like produce, I was thinking that Argentina and Brazil's different production cycle will kick in some imports during our harvest season, our off season. I'm not seeing that in here. Argentina had a lot of export of raw peanuts, particularly in 2012 when we had a very bad year. But other than that, not a lot of raw peanut enters the market. And by month also, there's not a lot of variation in terms of imports coming into the country. Here, I just want to make a distinction between what we do versus what the rest of the world does. And in terms of production allocated to oil and edible peanuts, we are about 11% that goes to oil. Turns out the rest of the world uses 60% of their production for oil production. There's a huge difference between how we do peanuts versus what the rest of the world does for peanuts. And I've just kind of recapped the export-import story. Our the left side, the top left side, you look at the raw peanuts and the processed peanut imports of our imports of U.S. And raw peanuts, not really much. That's over time, a couple of decades there. But we are importing a lot more processed peanuts. On the right side, at the bottom, you got the exports. You notice you're exporting a lot of raw products, and we are not exporting as much processed products as we would like to. What are the opportunities for us? We are, like I said, we are primarily focused on the raw peanut side of things. China, there's been a shift in sales. They've shifted to African market for raw peanuts, and India for peanut oil. So that market is not attractive or not competitive anymore for us. Canada and Mexico are our reliable partners and importers as well as exporters to us. But there is the possibility of retaliatory tariffs depending on the outcomes of the renegotiated USMCA. That's coming up soon. The deadline's coming up soon. EU is also a key partner, and I think we have a framework agreement with the EU for a deal that includes non-tariff barriers. But the devil's in the details. We don't have the details yet exactly on what is being negotiated and whether there would be changes to the sampling procedure for aflatoxin, as well as any relaxation of the limits on aflatoxins. Where do I see things going forward? Definitely we are facing a lot of pressures on the input side, and particularly labor, and also interest rates staying high. That's a lot of money that's being spent on servicing debt. We definitely need technology to improve yield. While we got a significant boost on the reference price in the one big beautiful bill, which I think Amanda will talk about a bit later, but trade policy uncertainty is going to be a damper until we get some clarity on that dimension. We still have to wait and see. So in terms of outlook, the tariff rate quota system that we have does offer protection, but there's going to be long-term pressure on it, particularly because we have side agreements with many countries, and if you open up free shipments of peanuts into the U.S. from those countries as part of the side agreements, there's going to be long-term pressures on the industry. One positive news is exports are up a little bit, 20% this year in the last 6-7 months. In terms of export markets, you're seeing primarily saturation in terms of edible markets. The opportunities are in the processed markets. Peanut oil, as I mentioned, the rest of the planet produces peanut, 60% of it that's used for oil production, whereas in our case it's only 11%, so there's really a good opportunity there. And then peanut butter, health consciousness, increasingly driving people towards peanut butter, and there's a real good opportunity there. And our share of the market is only 24% globally. So that's where I see some opportunities for Georgia as well as the southeastern peanut industry. I'll end there, and happy to take any questions.